Hey there, thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode of The Deliberate Zoomer, hosted by myself, Silas Maynor, and my good friend, Michael Simonton. We hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Who?
Bam, we're live. Welcome back, everybody, to the show with Michael Simonton and myself, where we discuss living your 20s with intention, setting yourself up for a trajectory for the rest of your life that is, I guess, in line with what you're looking for. So today we're going to be discussing the idea and the principle of setting rules for your life, a set of morals, essentially, or rules, or I guess just things that you stick to that will help you to get to where you want in life. So I guess just initially, this is, this topic is slightly similar to some of the topics we've discussed in the past. We want to tie it together with really, now that you've figured out what's important to you and you've decided kind of the main areas that you want to focus on, you've become honest with yourself about what exactly it is that's important to you. And then you've started to surround yourself with the right people. And now you've already learned how to say yes and no to certain things. Now it's time to create this set of rules that is reflecting all of those things, right? So that you can live by those rules in your life. So I guess, Michael, initially, what are some of your first thoughts or, experiences that you've seen personally or in friends of people who, they stuck to it? Maybe they were religious and they had morals they stuck to growing up versus people who didn't, some examples that we can talk about the differences here.
Sure, yeah. So some examples, you can get as simple as, boarding school, right? So I went to private Catholic boarding school. We had a lot of rules, and it's pretty easy to see the benefits, the cost benefit analysis, whatever, when you're in such a scenario, because it's either you follow the rules and you're okay, you do fine, or you don't and you get penalized in some form of manner. They're pretty basic rules. I think a lot of them are stupid because they have to deal with a lot of irresponsible teenagers. However, there are some that have solid grounds, and those are the ones that carry the most extreme repercussions. So, for instance, you're not supposed to sneak out and go see a girl, especially if you're living on like a private Catholic boarding school and on a little dorm. And there's this one kid who is a senior year. He's like 2 weeks away from graduating, but he finally got caught doing that. And he got expelled because they found out it's been going on for like most of the year, and he was there sneaking out and hooking up and stuff. And you're like, okay, like clearly we have some well-defined rules here, and you chose to go outside of them. You chose to break them. And well, in your own personal life, if you're setting rules for yourself, you're not going to have someone there like cracking down on you when you make this mistake. You should still somewhat take that approach with yourself. Like when you create rules, you should make sure that you follow up with yourself in some sort of disciplinary manner. Otherwise, you'll find that you tend to slowly stray from them because there's no repercussions. Besides, that voice in your back of your head, your conscience telling you, like, yes, like, no, that was awful. You shouldn't have done that. You're a horrible person, whatever. I'm not a huge fan of that negative talk, so I kind of shut that up anyways. But when it comes to rules and like hard lines in the sand, I think that's very important to have. And that's just like it's a hilarious story how it all came to fruition. But that's one instance of where I think of like breaking rules, and it's super simple. You create these things. They've been created for you in some instances, and there are lines in the sand that you can't cross, or you can, but just be willing to accept the consequences.
Yeah, I think that goes back to really the idea of accepting responsibility, right? So we talked about that earlier, is accepting responsibility for your life. And the idea with rules is you've already acknowledged that there are consequences for things in life. So if you set these rules that are in line with all of your other, your priorities, you're basically just formalizing what you want already. So you're becoming your own master. So as you've, grown up, I think the school example is great because these kids are, we all grew up with rules of some sort, I think, unless you're totally lawless. I don't know many people who didn't grow up with any rules. There's some kind of rules, right? And then you get to a point where once you've really started to take ownership of your life and it's up to you, you make the decision of what you want to be, and then you set your own rules. And more often than not, what I see is people, they, for example, I think it happens a lot of times in Catholic circles we have this set of morals that we want to stick to, and we're told how to live and everything, right? We have these ideas and these commandments that we stick to. But then in reality, once you go off on your own, you move out, you haven't, many people, what I've seen, have not taken ownership of those. So it's basically a rule set that's setting on the table, and they're deciding whether or not they want to take it. They, in principle, have obeyed them, but now they have an opportunity to break them. And more often than not, people do end up going breaking them. And then they realize later on, like, oh shit, I should actually, I should probably stick to these rules, right? Or they formalize them in their own way maybe, and they make it their own rule set, because there are consequences to all actions. And I think that it's very important, once you've started to take ownership of your life, to say what you do want and what you don't, because it's kind of like, military training with what to do in each situation. If you've already discussed with yourself in your mind, like, in this situation, I will act this way or I'll do this, then it's so much easier once you get to the situation to just handle it correctly. Whether it's, a confrontation and you want to make sure you don't get upset, like practicing these things and having at least in your mind gone through and just decided how you react or how you respond, I think that can be very helpful for going through your life. What are some other thoughts you have on this? I guess for people who, help for them to help decide what these rules are. I know that we obviously have made reference a few times to the 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. I've kind of created a list of like 30 some rules for myself so far. That's expanding. What are some ways that you have created rules for yourself, and ways that you recommend other people do it?
So, to be blatantly honest, I haven't created that many rules for myself, which definitely has its downsides. And it's something I should probably get on. But how would I go about it? Well, it's super simple. And the reason I haven't done it is because I haven't seen too much of a need. Until recently, I didn't see a need for too many rules. And then I was like, you know what? It's like, based off of just a recent interaction or occurrence, I was like, I should probably have some sort of rules around this one subject, because it's the one thing that I just don't care, don't think about too much, don't care about too much. And so that's the same situation you're just talking about, where you don't think about it, what you're going to do beforehand, and you end up in the moment and you're like, you know what, like, if I had set up some sort of guidelines or rules around this, I would have handled the situation much better. So with that in mind, I do need to make some rules there, and how I would do that is really, it's just taking everything we've talked about in the prior episodes, saying yes and no, determining what you want out of your life, figuring out priorities and all these things. And it's just going one step more granular with them. So you say you're a Catholic, you say, that's important to you. So what does that look like in your day-to-day interactions? Where would you stray from that? And one of the huge things for Catholicism that really loses traction with the young and up-and-coming crowd is the premarital sex. The teaching by the church is that that's not a thing. Sex is for marriage. It's for the procreation of human life. And so that's not something you do outside of marriage. And so that loses a lot of people, but it's a rule. And if you're a Catholic, then you're going to follow that. And so you need to create that rule for you. Now, sure, it's in the 10 Commandments and you probably see it everywhere, but unless you adopt those for yourself, it's not going to happen. So some things you can do is like, okay, for instance, take some How I Met Your Mother in here. Ted Mosby, nothing good ever happens after 2 a.m. So like, that's it, super simple scenario. 2 a.m., that's your cutoff line. For the Catholic scenario, all right, so I'm just not going to let myself into this certain occasion with a specific individual at these, within these parameters. So just create, get very granular with it. Yourself, what's going to cause you to probably break those rules. And so just get granular with it and create rules around that. And it's just that forward thinking you were talking about, like, okay, if X, Y, and Z happens, how am I going to handle that? And then create a rule around that.
I mean, this is the power of being human and having this ability to use prudence, right? We've been able to figure out what we like, what we want, what is important to us ahead of time. And as humans, if we're being completely honest with ourselves, we know that we struggle with certain things in the moment, right? We'll get into an argument that we don't want to or something like that. Like we know that we struggle with those things, so we can think ahead of time to create these rules. Because once you've created this rules and you've verbalized it, written it down, reviewed it, once a week at least, then you just start to subconsciously, it's like you reprogram your fight or flight type of mentality, where it's like, oh, I'm in this situation, so it equals this action. Not, I'm in this situation, what should I do? And then you just kind of like in the moment, it's really hard to figure it out, because something that I've tried to do a lot of in the past month or two here is to really, it was something I was trying to do for training with my job, but also it just helps in general, is in life in general, is to step outside of yourself, right? To imagine yourself viewing you from a completely disinterested third party. Because how many times have we had friends that have come to us with questions or advice or a complaint or something, and it's like so obvious. It's like, dude, this is exactly what you need to do. It's so simple. But they don't see that because they're not outside of themselves. So if you can do that to yourself, be very honest, you can help set those rules. Look back. I think a good place to start too would be, look at the areas that you've struggled with your life, that you've left breadcrumbs, did things that you regretted. It's like, I really wish I didn't do that. So, but is it something that recurs? Like, do I do this all the time? And I hate it every time. All right, make a rule around that. Just be super honest with yourself. Make these rules, even though some people don't like being subject to rules, right? Like, I hate rules. I think rules are for the stupid people, right? For the people who like are average, and I don't consider myself average. So I get that, but at the same time, if you want to be the master of your own life, you got to be smart enough to set your own rules.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's super simple, like scenario referencing something you just said there, when you get angry, you've noticed that you're inclined to lose your temper every now and then. So create a simple rule. Okay, when I feel my blood start to boil, you feel like, that fight or flight kicks in and you're just ready to go. When you start feeling that way, you take a step back, you take like 5 deep breaths, count to 10, whatever you want to do, but create a rule around that. If you've noticed you're that type of person that gets that way. If you're the type of person that, I don't know, maybe you're kleptomaniac, like create some set of rules, be like, okay, like obviously don't steal. But if that's not going to bother you, be like, all right, well, I'm not like, you get granular. Don't allow yourself to go into like those specific occasions where you'd want to steal, and with the outcome being you stealing. Like, so like, if you're going shopping and stuff, maybe
Just
stay
shop
in front of the cameras. Just shop with a friend. Shop online. Like just don't be like, okay, I know I really struggle with this thing, and like this is where I mess up normally, and this is how I always feel bad about it. So I'm going to create some guidelines around that, and I'm going to make sure that I stay on course with the direction and with the person that I want to be. And it's just that it's helping you get more granular towards the best version of yourself, whatever you've deemed that is.
Yeah, I think that there's this thing that was this basic idea that was mentioned in the book, The Personal MBA. So it's very a broad book about just like business in general and best practices. And I always am drawn to these psychological sections. But he talks about the idea of, if you want to change a habit, change your surroundings or your circumstances. He gave an example of when him and his wife decided that they wanted to be a vegetarian for a while, I think, or vegan. I don't remember exactly. All they did was they started only buying certain groceries, basically putting certain restaurants on the list of places they would go. And as a result, it wasn't hard to make the transition because they changed their circumstances. They changed what they were around. So they didn't have to battle with those individual things. If there's no other option, you're fine. So that's why you're not battling in the moment. These rules can be things that are changing the circumstances so that you're only in circumstances where it's conducive to what you want, right? So these rules. And I think that we don't have a specific episode set aside for for habits. So this is kind of in the same line. We'll talk about accountability and routines in the next episode here. But just in general, these rules can be part of the habits you're looking to build, right? So it's either you can go and figure out what are the habits you want and how are the rules to get there, or maybe the rules are the habits, right? Get up at a certain time every day, go to bed at a certain time every day. I think that those very simple things are, and again, I think you put it very well, as being very granular, being very specific about what you want. Because when you're vague, like it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and these things are also going to help you, like get your life more on track. It's going to make you feel better. Sure, like I tried doing the go to bed getting up ones. I tend to get up around 6:30 every day, but I don't like having a rule. Well, I tend to not have a rule there because I'm like, okay, yesterday my alarm went off and I was like, oh, I rolled over, I was like slightly sore throat. I'm going back to sleep. I don't care. Like, I try to run off of as little sleep as possible, but tonight I'm going to sleep some more. So that's why I've never really liked those rules, but they are good because the rule proves the exception. No, the exception proves the rule. I take that back. So the exception proves the rule, It wouldn't be a rule if there weren't the exceptions. And so that's clearly and something that you can use, especially if people come to like argue rules and stuff, because they always do. They're like, well, what about these things? And you're like, okay, well, those are only exceptions because there is a rule. Anyways, slightly off tangent, but to habits and rules go hand in hand. And I'd say like if you're playing with habits is just taking it one step like broader than rules, because rules are the very granular one. Habits are like these are the type of ways you will comport yourself, essentially. Like when you have a habit, you get to ensure consistency throughout your behavior, but also it's consistency without thought. And that's where the real power comes in, because once you've created these rules, once you've done this enough times, you've gotten up early enough, it becomes a habit, and no longer is there a decision there ever. You just do it. This is what you do. And if you want to go about creating habits, one of the easiest ways, one of the best ways, is to just reframe how you say things. So, let's say you've been pretty bad about working out recently and you don't like that. You want to start working out. So you create a rule for yourself. I'm going to work out 5 days a week. And you start doing that. But one other really thing you can do to take that up a notch is just to be like, I am the type of person where no matter what happens, like, I don't care if you get home late from work, like, I work out. Like, I am the type of person who works out regardless of the circumstances. And then you can go through and you can get really granular with those. But by saying that over and over again, and by identifying with that, you really help propel yourself in that direction and start formulating those habits.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that one thing that came to mind while you were discussing that is this. So you said it's one less decision you have to make, right? It's an automatic decision. So you don't have to think about it, which is important specifically if you want to focus on a career, right? If you're trying to grow yourself to a place where you're making big decisions, you're the CEO of a company or something like that, you need to be able to eliminate many small decisions, because our brains only have capacity to make so many decisions in a day. And in reality, what I've learned is that from the books I've read is that whether the decision is small or large, it actually takes up about the same amount of effort. So even if it's deciding what you're going to wear in the morning, right? And this reminded me of the example of, I think it's Mark Zuckerberg, who like basically wears the same thing every day.
Steve Jobs.
What?
Sorry, nothing. I think it's Steve Jobs. Regardless.
Either way, is Steve Jobs or Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg? I can't remember, but they like basically wear the same thing all the time. That way, it's one less decision they have to make, right? So once you can create these rules, you're not grappling with these decisions, right? And then you can get, I don't know if we talked about this before, but one thing that really struck me with some of the Jordan Peterson's work is you cannot excel to a place of betterment until you've gotten to a place of like stability, right? So if you're constantly dealing with these crises every day, you're never going to be able to get to the point where you can get that promotion at work. Like if your family life is absolute shit and you're trying to just make sure everybody's safe and all this, like all the time, like these massive crises, then you're never going to get to that next level. So it's the same kind of thing with these big decisions. If you want to be making big decisions, you need to get all the small decisions, the things that are important out of the way, because then you have this guiding factor, right? It's like a plane taking off to who knows where. Like there's no destination. We're just going to take off and start flying, and then hopefully we have enough gas when we decide to land, or fuel. Like you need to have a direction, and you need to have all the rules set in place to get there, because otherwise you're never going to reach your destination. And it seems like it's tough, and it sometimes sucks. Like I've had this, because I have this rule of going to bed at a certain time. I don't always stick to that. I do make exceptions to that occasionally, but more often than not, I want to make an exception when it's really like, all right, I'm just being lazy and I want to play video games longer. I'm just going to stay up a little bit. It's like, no, I know that if I go to bed at 9:30 or 10 o'clock, I'm going to feel great tomorrow. Even though I have to cut myself off a little bit from Netflix or whatever it is, I am going to feel wonderful when I do and I stick to my rule tomorrow. So it's quite a freeing feeling, actually, once you get into the habit of it.
Absolutely. And, one thing about habits too that I feel always needs to be mentioned is that you don't realize it, but you'll spend the vast majority of your life going through habits of some sort, whether it's the habit of waking up and brushing your teeth, the habit of how you go about making and eating breakfast, and the habit of, your nightly routine, whatever these things are, they slowly become habits. And that's where you spend like the vast majority of your life on like this almost autopilot. And so it would best, it'd be the best for you, for everyone, if you took that knowledge in mind and were a little proactive about it. And so you're like, okay, well, I know I'm going to spend so much of my life doing this. Why not just make some sort of rules so I can build this habit the exact way that I want to? That's the most beneficial for me. And that's exactly, to tie those two in together, that's exactly what you're doing there. And yeah, it sucks sometimes. Yeah, but so does being an adult, man. Life's not always sunshine and rainbows. We want it to be. But with the acceptance of responsibility, yeah, there's a burden on your shoulders. So you just got to own up to it,
Yeah.
And
I think it's very important, again, just to stress the idea, like these rules, go through your life, go through what we've already talked about. What is important to you? What do you actually want to accomplish? These things, create the rules that help you to get there basically on autopilot. Because if you can do that, you can put more effort into the important, non-urgent sector of your life, which is planning and figuring out what is actually important, thinking ahead of yourself, being one step ahead. And, I don't want to go too much into accountability and the routine part yet, because we'll talk about that next episode of forming those routines and how to do it and how to get that with accountability. So, but I guess, is there anything else you want to add to this idea of rules and, the importance of it? I think that we've covered a lot of things here. So I feel like if you have any closing thoughts, it'd be fine.
Not so much to add, but just to say, like, rules, they suck. But if you're taking this proactive approach to your life, if you're trying to live your 20s deliberately, they are a must-have. So create these rules to build these habits, to become the person you want to be. So you live your 20s and the rest of your life, and however you decided, live them deliberately. And that's really it. I mean, it might, and it's always hard at first. It's always harder in the beginning. That's just how it goes. You have that initial friction. You have to break your old rules and habits, and that's fine. But stick to it, get through it, and you'll be a much better person because of it.
Yeah, and I think just the last thing that I would add to end with is not everybody's gonna have the same set of rules, right? Your rules are gonna be unique to you. So don't, you can experiment with other people's rules that they use, but make sure that they're actually in line with everything you want. Because as great as somebody else's rules might sound, they might not actually be good for you. And then also remember to implement one at a time. Like you can't completely change your life. If you're really struggling with a lot of things in your life, don't try to change everything. Like Jordan Peterson talks about it, like make your bed first thing, right? There's one tiny thing you can do. And then once you start doing that, then you can change your other habits. So just one rule at a time. Remember to tailor it to what you're looking for. And thank you guys for joining us today. Thank you for showing up to the show. Again, next time we're going to talk about accountability and routines, and we look forward to seeing you then.